Hi, and welcome to another episode of Bible Students Online. Today, we're going to have a bit of a history lesson. Did you know that by 1931, 75% of the original Bible students had defected, had abandoned the Watchtower Society? Well, during the conflict between Judge Rutherford and the Bible students, there was an individual by the name of William Snell, and he held a very high position in Watchtower Society, and he made some very keen observations. And by the time he wrote this book, 30 Years a Watchtower Slave, he was no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses or a Bible student. Sad to say, he had gone into the nominal systems, believing all its tenets, Trinity, hellfire, and whatnot. But that did not take away from his years with the society and what he had observed. Now, Snell observed that additional changes in doctrine and strong promotions by Judge Rutherford led to a significant rise in new members that were going to be loyal to him. However, this sparked resistance from, for lack of a better term, Pastor Russell's Bible students, who continued to be part of the Watchtower Society, trying to undo Judge Rutherford's alterations to doctrine and practice. And Snell describes Judge Rutherford's response as follows, and this can be found in his book on page 41. He says, "In order to crystallize matters to the point of a crisis, the Society instituted early in 1925 a rigid method of accounting and reporting to it all time spent in witnessing with its books. And needless to say, this caused a cleavage all over the world, with many refusing to report time and placement, and still others refusing even to place the Society's books. In the decade from 1921 to 1931, almost three-fourths of the Bible students originally associated with the Society in a loose fashion left the Society's supervision behind." Snell commented on those who departed, saying, quote, "That is precisely what the new Watchtower Society wanted and what they had hoped to accomplish." End of quote. About the new converts, Snell noted these were mainly the ones left after the careful removal of three-fourths of the Bible students had taken place. Memorial attendance numbers provide valuable insight into the changes in Watchtower membership during its early years. And so, the figures that I'm going to be sharing with you are taken from the book Jehovah's Witnesses and a Divine Purpose, published by the Society back in 1959, which includes various references to memorial attendance records from the 1920s. And those numbers are as follows. In 1917, there were 21,274 members associated with the Society. In 1918, there were no reports gathered. In 1919, there were 17,961. So there was a little dip there. In 1920 and 1921, no reports were gathered. In 1922, they almost doubled their numbers, 32,661 members. In 1923, an additional 10,000. They had 42,000. In 1924, they went up to 62,696. In 1925, they almost got up to 100,000. 90,434. And then the dip comes down. In 1926, 89,278 members. Between 1927 and 1934, apparently there were reports gathered, but they were never printed. So we don't have those figures. But remember, in 1926, they had 89,278. 2 years later, in 1928, they had 17,380. Almost as much as they had back in 1919. And then by 1935, 27,006 members. So, Rutherford, who authored the book Jehovah in 1934, he says on page 277, of the great multitude that left the world to follow after Christ Jesus, only a few are now in God's organization. Many turned away from Jehovah and the commander of his hosts. Some of these grew fat and forsook the Lord and drew others after them. Well, this seems to go a long way towards confirming the memorial attendance figures, like about 90,434 in 1925 versus a bit over 19,000 in 1928. So, if you take the attendance of, say, 21,274 in 1917 and subtract it from the peak attendance of 90,434 in 1925, you find a drop of nearly 76.5%. However, it's important to note that the Millions campaign attracted many new people. And so the Millions campaign, that is, millions now living will never die, began in 1918 and claimed that the church would be complete by 1921 and the kingdom will be established by 1925. And so when that year passed without any significant events, many left. But a lot of them were new converts. And so those who remained loyal to Russell's teachings started leaving as early as 1917, and the numbers kept decreasing steadily through the late 1920s, showing a slow but consistent decline in the original membership. Even more revealing is this quote from Judge Rutherford himself in the November 15, 1930 Watchtower on page 339. He says, "The total number of those who have withdrawn from the society and now oppose its work is comparatively large when such are taken all together. These are now divided into many companies, all claiming to be followers of Christ and claiming to be God's little flock, while at the same time they speak evil things concerning those who are faithfully endeavoring to serve God. They denounce the society and its work, saying that its activities are due to a man-made theory, and that those who go to make up the society are carnally minded and are engaged in the book-selling business and not in the service of Jehovah." I just want to piggyback on what he said here about them claiming that they are now divided into many companies, all claiming to be followers of Christ. It should be noted that in Brother Russell's day, the Watchtower Society was nothing more than a publishing house. He referred to it as a business for publishing truth material and making them available to whomever wanted to use them in their witness work. It wasn't God's visible organization on earth. It didn't dictate to the Bible students what they should and shouldn't do or believe. Every congregation, and I think eventually the society had named their congregations, I think they went from ecclesias to companies. So that's why he used that term, companies. But the various companies or ecclesias or congregations of Bible students were always independent of each other, autonomous. They governed themselves. They elected their own officers, their own elders and deacons and secretaries and treasurers and whatnot. And so it functioned back then the same way it does today. So after they abandoned the society as their publisher, they created other publishing houses, and that's all they were. They were publishing houses, not some Vatican-like organization. Okay, so the judge clearly saw that when comparing those who remained with the society to those who left, the latter group were larger. So if you put all the Bible students together, they were larger than the society was. And this included the Layman's Home Missionary Movement, the Dawn Bible Students Association, the Pastoral Bible Institute, and several other smaller groups, which is why he mentions when such are taken all together. Other researchers have attempted to create, precise statistics, and their findings generally indicate that around 3/4 of the original members during the pastor's time had departed from the Watchtower Society by 1931. Not only did about 75% of the original Bible students from Brother Russell's era leave the Watchtower by 1931, but many new converts from the unsuccessful Millions campaign had also departed by 1928. And so following this, J.F. Rutherford renamed his group to the Jehovah's Witnesses to set it apart from the various Bible student groups that had been established. And so with a new marketing and organizational approaches, the Jehovah's Witness organizations grew dramatically in the multi-million member organizations of today. Rutherford mentioned that more people had left the society than those who remained. Here's a quote from the December 1st, 1927 Watchtower on page 355, that first column, paragraph 4. He says, "During the past 50 years, God has been causing his light to shine with increasing power upon his word. He has not given his people new truths, but illuminated the truths already given." I think that can be debated. "During that short period of time, many have separated themselves from all organized systems of religion and have tried to walk in the way that Jesus and the apostles walked. For a time, they made progress, and then many became tired and weary in well-doing, or thought more highly of themselves than they should think or became lawless, while others became offended. These turned away, so that today the larger percent of those who withdrew from the so-called organized Christianity have turned aside and again gone back into the world." We now go to the November 15, 1930 Watchtower on page 342, first column, and the first two paragraphs. And there he says, "Those who tremble at God's word are the ones who are diligent to keep and obey his commandments. They have no fight, to be sure, with the opposers, and mention is here made of it, not for the purpose of controversy, but that God's people may be encouraged in seeing the fulfillment of prophecy, as it is manifested by the will of God. They shall be encouraged. When it is clearly seen that the opposition to God's work was long ago foretold by his prophet, and that the prophecy is now being fulfilled, such is a great encouragement to the faithful, and is an evidence that the Lord is dealing with them and that they are in his favor. It is therefore clear that it is the will of God that attention of the faithful shall be called to these things at this time. The total number of those who have withdrawn from the society are now opposed its work is comparatively large, when such are taken all together. These are now divided into many companies, all claiming to be followers of Christ and claiming to be God's little flock, while at the same time they speak evil things concerning those who are faithful, endeavoring to serve God." Interestingly, he's doing, in this very same quote, what he claims the Bible students are doing. So, many Jehovah's Witnesses do not realize that Rutherford chose the name Jehovah's Witnesses to clearly separate those who stayed with the society from those who left. And so people often believe it was only because of new light. But the resolution passed at the 1931 convention in Columbus, Ohio, focused on the need for a new name because of the division. If you want the text of the resolution and the related article, just ask, and I'll send it to you. In fact, I'll post it, a link to it. So during the 1930 through 32 period, Rutherford frequently criticized those who had left the society with these attacks published in the Watchtower, while the Golden Age featured harsh and sarcastic responses to writings by the early Dawn Brethren. And so, for many years, Jehovah's Witnesses have been taught that the challenges and divisions around 1918 were part of the prophecies in Daniel and Revelation coming true. The belief is that, the Lord arrived at his temple in 1918 and judged who his true followers were. And so Jesus recognized that the Watchtower Society was fulfilling his mission, so they were accepted, while everyone else was rejected. This included not just Christendom, but also those who opposed the society's work. And the indication that others were rejected was their lack of organization, disinterest in, spreading the gospel, and absence of the Lord's Spirit. I still get that argument today from Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh, you guys are not accomplishing the Lord's Great Commission. You're not preaching. Who's ever heard of you? However, there were actually two groups of Bible students who were actively preaching, striving to stay true to their understanding of the truth, and were surprised by the many unusual new ideas being spread at that time. And so the Society's three official historical accounts primarily blamed Brother Paul S.L. Johnson for the troubles, but they have not disclosed that there was in fact competition among the three groups, the Watchtower, PBI, Johnson, in the 20s. Articles published in the Watchtower were often met with responses from Johnson and the PBI, and then Johnson's writings were frequently countered without acknowledging that Rutherford was responding to him. Later, when the Dawn Publishers, now the Dawn Bible Association, was incorporated in 1932, well, then they joined the debate, and they were essential in reorganizing the Bible Students Association and getting all these various splinter groups or independent congregations to join them as a publisher, not as a governing body of sorts. So these four groups were going back and forth, regarding the truth. So these debates among these four groups lasted for the most part a good 20 years, with the most activities occurring in the 20s and then bleeding into the 30s. So a common issue that all four groups face was excessive type making. We're talking about types and antitypes that were prominent, especially among Judge Rutherford and Paul S.L. Johnson. Those were the two masters of typing. So the gradual changes printed in the Watchtower are often linked to Bible prophecy, just as the views of Johnson and for the most part the PBI, the Pastoral Bible Institute. So, in summary, while the Society presents itself as the sole active group, others were equally, if not more, engaged in their efforts. There's a couple of witnesses that I debate with online on these various forums that are out there, and one, as I mentioned, says, "Well, who's ever heard of you? No, you guys have never knocked on my door." And I'm like, there's more to witnessing than knocking on doors. I said, and the fact that you and I are talking right now shows that you've heard of us. You know who I am. You know who we are. And so you have no excuse. If I want to pull the Jehovah's Witness card and say, well, I'm giving you the message, you don't accept it, you're going to go into second death, because that's their message for the most part when they knock on your door. If you don't accept their message, They just wipe their feet and walk away, and when Armageddon comes, you're dead. Now, of course, they keep flipping back and forth as to, who's going to survive, and I think for the most part they say these things to appease the court systems who are coming after them for their harsh treatment of their members or even former members. I would like to say that, as I've mentioned to this one particular Jehovah's Witness, that if Bible students had decided that the door was closed, and that is the door to heaven, and we focus on an earthly class, a restitution class, then yeah, we could probably be in the millions too. I mean, it's interesting to note that the great crowd that is mentioned in the Revelation 7, that the society claims is an earthly class. They say that that was a class that was discovered in 1935. And so prior to 1935, Judge Rutherford kept doing all these types and anti-types, and he called them various names. I think one of them was modern worthies. So you had the ancient worthies, which were the Old Testament prophets, and then you had the modern worthies, which is, of course, those who would come in after the door was closed. They would be part of this restitution class. Paul Johnson called them youthful worthies. And so then he changed it to the other sheep of John chapter 10. And he said that the other sheep are those who will inherit paradise earth. And then in 1935, he gave that opus speech, which connected the little flock or the other sheep with the great company, Revelation 7. And he said they're one and the same. And after describing the new earth and paradise, he says, who wouldn't want to live there? Stand up if you would love to live in a place like that. And people stood up, and he goes, behold, the great company. And they're all looking at each other. Some of them sat back down. But it's interesting because then the society admits that from that point on in 1935, believing that the door to heaven was closed, they started to focus on this earthly class. And so that the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses from that point on were of this earthly class. So when you studied with Jehovah's Witnesses, you weren't given an option. You were already delegated to be part of this restitution class, those who would live on paradise earth. There was no way you were going to be running for the prize of the high calling. And of course, they had to amend their view of the door being closed because, that generation of 1914 was not going to pass away until all these things came about. And that generation, as time went by, got older and older and started dying off, and till there were none left. And so they had to reimagine what generation meant. And they kept making the generation a little older and saying, well, it could be generation of 1914. Then it goes, it could be generation, maybe later on. Maybe generation who heard about 1914. And as time went by, they had to admit that they came up with some crazy new idea what a generation was. And more had left the organization. And then I think it was in 2013, in a study article, the society admits that 1935 was a no good, as they say. And so they abandoned the 1935 date. And so my question to Jehovah's Witnesses is, if 1935 proved to be wrong, then how can you still believe in a group that you created based on a date? Now, granted, the term great company, great crowd, great multitude, it's a biblical one. But you created that group based on the year, 1935. We're going to focus on this new group. But 1935 proved to be false. It's old light. It's no longer relevant today. So what does that do to a group you founded based on an error? I ask you, where do you stand if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses and part of this restitution class? Now, I'm not saying there's not going to be a restitution class, but the fact is that the Lord is not dealing with a restitution class. He's not calling us second-class citizens to be part of the kingdom. He's only calling one group of people, and those who would be part of the little flock. And until that little flock is complete, and the last member enters in, he's not going to deal with anyone else. He's not going to deal with the nation of Israel. He's not going to deal with the world. He's not going to deal with anything. Because it's that last member that gets in when the marriage of the bride comes into fruition, and then the kingdom starts. And then everyone enters into the kingdom. They're all taught of God. They learn everything. They learn everything that God has done for them through the person of Jesus Christ. And then at the end of that 1,000 years, when mankind has become perfect in body, in mind, in soul, and spirit, and they have that perfect knowledge, and then they're tested, then the separating of the sheep and the goats occurs. And those who reject Christ and reject God's gift of grace go into everlasting destruction, second death. And those who obey and accept it and pass the tests enter into the kingdom and live forever. So, just thought I would share that with you. And if you enjoyed this bit of history, hit the like button. If you didn't, you can always hit the thumbs down button and maybe give your thoughts in the comment section. I will be posting some links to the transcript of this talk. It'll be on the Food for Thinking Jehovah's Witness website, and along with actual pictures, I guess, scans of the various quotes, so you can see that I'm not making these up. So until we meet again, Lord bless, and have a good day.